Now, after that first trailer, we thought we'd be getting a slightly worse adaptation to previous parts, and that was kind of the overall consensus from the community.
I had some concerns with the colors used and some movements looking stiff.
It does look weird.
Feeling a little disappointed, mostly due to expectations that resulted in a more negative impression than what I think about it now.
Teaser was kinda disappointing.
But then, the second trailer dropped. So here's why the Steel Ball Run anime will look better than you think. Now, it doesn't open up with anything amazing yet. It's just a shot of the American flag, then a cut to Johnny looking at the sky. But after that, we get a great shot of the Hotel Coronado that we got a glimpse at in the first trailer. But even here, we get to see just how small that starting town in San Diego really is. And is our first real show of how the backgrounds will look. As in a previous video, I mentioned that with all the different styles, it would be hard to say which type of backgrounds we'd be actually getting, but it looks to be similar to the Rohan OVAs, which do look great, as the shots of the horse pen, as well as the tents of the hundreds of racers that will be competing in the Steel Ball Run race, and that contrasts with the yellows of the cowboys that will be racing for the prize money, and the white and reds of the upper class that will be watching. But it doesn't look very JoJo, as that color shift in sky really does give it that look, and makes every scene pop. But maybe because it's a more tonally serious plot compared to the previous parts, this could be reflected in the colors used. But due to the crazier plot later on in the manga, it could be a setup to shift from this normal setting to more of a bizarre one in the later stages of the race. As yes, this first episode is going to be the entirety of the first stage, which brings me to the fact that this episode is going to be 47 minutes long. And that's about 11 to 12 chapters of the manga to actually adapt. Don't get it wrong though, these chapters are not these 40+ page chapters we see later in the manga, as these beginning parts of the race were published weekly, so we're looking more in the 20-page range. As yes, Steel Ball Run actually does switch from weekly to monthly at some point, and due to it being monthly, you get more pages. So going off just this, it's hard to speculate just how long the anime is going to last, but they still have a lot to cover in that time frame. As in those 12 chapters, we are not only getting character intros, mainly before the race even starts, but there's also going to be so much action to it, as they're starting in the beach of San Diego, and then finishing in the central San Diego city streets, the distance being approximately 15 kilometers. So the hundreds of races you see, this first 40-minute episode is going to narrow that down to the top 50 races for the next stage. And from this panel, without spoiling too much, we get to see not only what the racers have to go through, but what the animators will have to animate. So the amount of variety in character design, environment design, and story structure to fit into a 40-minute episode like this is going to be a massive undertaking. However, this shot of Steven confirms that there will be a conference scene, as these are clearly two different locations. So this is where I think we had it wrong before. David Production mentions changing things, but not outright removing them. Specifically, they state in this interview that they'll be restructuring the Sandman introduction. So what was at the very start of the story might now be placed in another section, rather than outright taken out, as 47 minutes isn't that long, and it's roughly around 325 pages they'll be adapting. So they'll have to cut a lot of that other stuff, or move that stuff further ahead. And like we see here with a younger Johnny, we will be getting some backstory stuff, as we get this really nice reaction shot of his face, almost calling back to the first season's effects design. But I mention this because they might push Poco Loco's, Sandman's, and even some of Johnny's backstory to later in the anime, like we saw in part 5, in which they sort of based each backstory around a character-centric episode. But it's kind of hard to say, as we cut to this gyro that has a really great almost one-to-one panel recreation. So it shows that they are being more faithful than part 5, and these newer shots have kind of convinced me that this is going to be a great adaptation, as if you compare these shots to any in the Stone Ocean trailer, they are miles ahead. As after this, we get an even better shot of Gyro, and Sugimori's designs really show how good they can look, as in close-up frames like this, and in promo art and the character sheets, the details look insane. And what I mean by this is, if you notice in the next shot, even the effects used are extremely similar to the Hamon effects from part 1 to 3, even down to a similar sound effect. And as Johnny's lifted into the air by the spin energy, we get another great color shift, and the lighting here looks so similar to part 1, and the overall look is extremely reminiscent of the sky, but with way more detail. As in the next shot, you get a really good look at what I'm talking about. The detailing on the horse here is also crazy. When I animated the horse shot for the fan trailer, I looked at anime like Attack on Titan, as they do a very similar stylization to the horses. And from afar, they look kind of basic, but it's in these up-close shots that they really shine. Same with this Diego shot, as we're looking at fully hand-drawn 2D horses. But the thing is, the 3D horses don't look that bad either. Again, they're playing it smart. Gyro is the focus of this shot and is in full 2D, whereas the rest of the riders are blurred out and covered in dirt and dust, exactly as I said they they would do. But if we look at the rest of the horse shots, due to just how fast paced it is, they all end up looking really well done. And again, the use of framing and effects brings them all to life. Then we get some amazing bits of animation. However, these are not even that overly animated, as the ball and even Gyro here are just both looping animations. As if I just create a loop here, you see what I mean. But what makes it so great is whoever that person is that animated it knows how to make these subtle elements, like the hat or the hair, which are counted as secondary animation or overlap animation, makes me actually re-examine the character sheets again, as Sugimori has not gone for that small detail, as they won't be seen from afar, so there's no point to really include them. But if there's an up-close shot like this, the sort of animatedness of those shots covers up the lack of details, sort of fixing that trade-off. Or like in the next shot, post-production is layered on top, as well as the hatching details sort of fill in the gaps of a less animated shot like this. Same with this shot of Diego passing Gyro, using the series onomatopoeia effect to add impact. But the two that keep all of that detail was Sandman and Poco Loco. As if you look at the character sheet and promo art, that detailing looks great. And as mentioned, if you look, these are also very similar to those Rohan OVAs. The comparison to the amount of detailing used, colors and shadow, you can get an impression what the other characters might even look like. But what's crazy is that for those two, their colors are pretty one-to-one with the manga colored pages. Now with the colored version of the manga, it came out way later, and they're known for sometimes how notoriously bad color schemes for characters. So the anime usually go with something completely different, which is why I find it so odd that while Johnny and Gyro are colored so differently, the rest of the cast looks so similar. I mean, these don't look bad, but I guess because it's what we've come to expect, they feel a little bit too basic. As when I was going through the other colors that they could have used, I found how I colored Poco Loco in that trailer from 9 years ago. And it's kind of so bizarre to see him in sort of a part 3 style. But the cool thing is the amount of palette switches the anime is doing. Poco Loco in white, Sandman in blue, and Dio in red. But if we look at Johnny and Gyro, their palette completely switches. Johnny looks like a mix between his hair from the game and his outfit from later in the part. And if you remember from one of my previous videos, I mentioned that how David Production usually looks at the super action statues for colors. And as we know now, they didn't for the base designs, but this looks extremely close to this Gyro color swap shown in this SAS figure. And here is what looks to be the final sprint of the first part of the race, showing that we will be getting that first stage in its entirety. And these shots they use in the new trailer makes the art look so dynamic. But here, when they do these long shots, they seem to be the weakest part of the animation. As when we compare that to previous parts, what it does is lack consistency. Part 4's long shots are even more less detailed and empty, but that worked because of the character designs. If you've been looking at these shots from the trailer and thought they look a little bit off, this is what might be contributing to it, as the designs in a vacuum look really great up close. But when viewed from further away like this, while their features are identifiable, the heavy detailing on some of the characters are hard to read and end up making the design look really off. If the pose it's drawn in is off, or they don't use a dynamic angle like this, the art just looks a little bit worse. Again, I'm criticizing a couple frames from a trailer of an anime that has a strict production timeline. But I bring this up because even though the first couple parts had way less detail, they look great no matter what angle that they were at. As what I mean by this is, in the next shot, we get to see that style really shine, as we get to see the 4 main races close up. And this is a great time to do a comparison to the manga, as yes, they don't really change that much when it comes to the detail. I mean, Steel Ball Run is a long manga, so when it gets down to it, Johnny and Gyro are rendered very differently throughout the series, so it'll be interesting to see how they might evolve the style throughout the anime. But they seem to be going for that more early appearance for characters like Poco Loco or Lucy Steele, where again, the rest fall into that Rohan OVA look, which isn't exactly a bad thing, as I'll end on this shot, as they even used it in the thumbnail for the trailer. The thick black outlines, the animation smears, the stand aura coming off the steel ball. Even for episode 1, I'm glad we're getting some great Sakuga. As yes, this episode's kind of special. We don't know much else yet, other than this is the first episode and it's going to be 47 minutes long, covering the first stage on March 19th, and of course, only on Netflix. But I'd like to talk about this specifically more in another video. So if you want to know more about how they'll be animating Steel Ball Run, you can check this video out here.
Jax, why did you choose that color palette for hot pants?